Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Playmakers. What's up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going through 5 players who are drastically falling down my rankings. So these are players who have underperformed their ADP coming into the season. And so I'm going to talk about how I valued them going into 2021. I'm going to talk about their first 3 weeks of the season and then where I kind of see them being valued throughout the rest of the season. So basically kind of how my rankings have changed. While you guys are watching this, if you're enjoying the content, please just hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. It could be about this video, it could be about waiver wire, trade advice, start sits, any fantasy football questions, drop them down below and I'll respond to every single person. But let's just get into the first player, and it is going to be Jonathon Taylor. He was my running back 10 going into the season, and overall, he was being drafted as an early second round pick. His ADP was actually in the first round throughout most of the offseason, but it fell to the early second, once we had injuries to Quentin Nelson and Carson Wentz. But there is no denying that he has been a major disappointment so far. He's the RB 31 through 3 weeks. He's averaging 10.7 PPR points per game, and he has not found the end zone yet. So 0 touchdowns in 3 games. I think that aspect of his production should be correcting in his favor. He's actually number 2 in red zone touches and number 1 in goal line carries. So it's pretty crazy that he has not gotten into the end zone yet. I think you can kind of view that 2 different ways. The first one is that he's getting the opportunities, the touchdowns will come. The second one is maybe like, even though he is getting all those opportunities, maybe he's not the best goal line back. This offensive line isn't helping him a ton. I feel like it's somewhere in between, but he's definitely going to have his fair share of touchdowns when we look back at this season. But the second thing that's kind of limiting his production so far is that his overall volume is way down from the end of last season. So Taylor wasn't the workhorse running back all of last season. He really kind of took over as the clear number 1 in week 11. And over the last 6 games of the season, Taylor was averaging 19.8 carries per game. He's only averaging 14 carries per game this year, so that's almost a 6 carry difference. And overall, the Colts offense has just been much worse this year. They have taken a major step back. In 2020, the Colts were averaging 27.9 points per game. This year, it's only 18.7. And I mean, that's pretty apparent to why Jonathon Taylor's usage is down. If you're up ahead in games, you're going to be running the ball to run down that clock. The running backs are going to be getting very involved. But if you're behind, you're going to have to throw the ball more. You're not trying to take time off the clock. So the overall lack of offensive success is not only going to hurt his touchdown production, but it's also going to affect that usage. And I just do not think he can be considered a top 10 running back anymore. I think he's more of like a fringe top 12 guy, somewhere in that RB12, RB13, RB14 range. But I do think there's a decent drop off, from maybe those top 10, 11 guys to Jonathon Taylor. I definitely think he's going to pick it up, throughout the season, but it just doesn't look like he has that upside we initially thought he would have coming into the year. The next player who's been a disappointment so far is another running back, and it is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was my running back 12 coming into this season. He was being drafted right at the fringe between the second and the third round, so a late second round pick or an early third round pick. And so far in 3 games, he is the RB 37, 9.9 PPR points per game, and he really just hasn't shown the upside that a lot of people kind of anticipated from Clyde Edwards-Helaire, myself included. I thought he could have a huge ceiling, and it has just not been there. His workload on the ground has been fine so far, 14.7 carries per game. If someone told me that going into the season, I'd feel pretty solid with that. That's 10th in the NFL. He's not a player who can only get his production on the ground, so I would say that'd be pretty solid. But the receiving work is something that I think a lot of people were banking on, and it has just been non-existent. 5 targets in 3 games. Only 5 targets in 3 games. That is 46th in the NFL, and I think that's something where people could have expected 5 targets a game out of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That is just not how they've been using him, and I also think people were expecting a lot of touchdown opportunities because he is playing on this high-scoring offense. The Chiefs are averaging 30.7 points per game, and in those 3 games, Clyde Edwards-Helaire only has 1 touchdown. He only has 6 red zone touches, which is 26th in the NFL at the running back position, and he has 0 goal line carries. So I think he's more of a mid-tier running back 2 moving forward, somewhere in that RB17, RB18 range. But there is definitely a major difference between him and, the players who had RB14, RB15, RB16. I think he's pretty firmly behind a lot of these other running backs. And I really think we kind of just have to accept the potential that we thought Clyde Edwards-Helaire could have in an Andy Reid offense with Patrick Mahomes is just not there. Mahomes just does not target him as much as we would like. We've seen people in these Andy Reid offenses, LaShawn McCoy, Kareem Hunt, they've been great dual threat backs, and it just looks like CEH is not going to be used that way. So we really just have to reevaluate him. And I think it's more of a mid-tier running back too. Then we're on to a wide receiver named Allen Robinson. He was my wide receiver 10 coming into the season. I felt great about him. He was being picked as a mid-third round guy, and I viewed him as one of the safest wide receivers you can find. That's really why I liked him. He may not have that crazy ceiling because he's not playing with a top-tier quarterback, but he had proven year after year with bad quarterback play that he could still put together, very solid fantasy football production. But through 3 games, he is the wide receiver 70, averaging 8.2 PPR points per game. And there's plenty of blame to go around, but he is definitely not without fault in this situation. He dropped a 40-yard touchdown pass week 2. Obviously, that gave him a big hit in that game, but I think everyone's aware that the bigger issue going on here is the Bears offense. The Bears are averaging 13.3 points per game. That's the second worst in the NFL behind the Jets, and the Bears have only passed for 400 yards in 3 games. That is so incredibly bad. And right now, I really think we only can view Allen Robinson as a bottom-end wide receiver 2, and honestly, that might be generous. This Week 4 matchup against the Lions will tell us a lot. This should be considered more of a tune-up game for him. This Lions secondary is not good. He should be able to feast, but we still don't even know who's going to be quarterback. It could be Fields, it could be Dalton, it could be Nick Foles. It is still all up in the air, but if he goes out against the Lions and struggles, then you're just looking at a guy whose ranking is going to continue to plummet. Hopefully he can correct the ship. Maybe it's just been a few bad weeks. We've seen him operate on bad offenses before. It just really hasn't been quite this bad. So that's kind of how I view Allen Robinson moving forward. The 4th player here is going to be another wide receiver, Robert Woods, and I had him as my wide receiver 13 coming into the season. A late 3rd round pick is where he was being drafted, and he was another wide receiver who I thought was supposed to be very safe. Robert Woods had put together back-to-back wide receiver 2 seasons, so I figured, he's basically locked into that. Plus, he has this newfound upside with an improved quarterback, Matthew Stafford, coming in. He could really take the next step and finish as a wide receiver 1, but he's really basically been a non-factor in this Rams offense so far. He's the wide receiver 52, averaging 10.4 PPR points per game, and Woods is no longer in competition with Cooper Kupp for that number 1 role. It was something that was debated. Is it Robert Woods? Is it Cooper Kupp? Who's really the true number 1? Is it a 1A, 1B type of situation? That's kind of how I viewed it, but I gave the slight edge to Robert Woods just because I thought they got him involved a little bit more creatively. He didn't rely as heavily on touchdowns as Cooper Kupp did, but I was totally off on that. I had Cooper Kupp as my wide receiver 15. I talked about him in yesterday's video, so they were close together, but I did give Woods the slight edge. And so far, his usage has just been very troubling. He's averaging 6.3 targets per game compared to 11 targets from Cooper Kupp. He has a 20.4% target share compared to Cooper Kupp's 35.5%. He's only running routes on 77.7% of the team pass plays. Cooper Kupp is running routes on 89.4% of the team's pass plays. And this isn't just a production difference between Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. As you can see, it's production and it's just overall usage. It's not a fluke that Cooper Kupp has put together 3 straight monster games and Robert Woods has been pretty underwhelming. And it's also not a situation where Woods is kind of being phased out and the offense is struggling. Like, this Rams offense has looked fantastic, so why are they going to change this? They're 3rd in the NFL in total points. They're 5th in passing yards, so this offense has been firing on all cylinders, and so I don't really think McVay's going to go out there and be like, oh, we really need to get Robert Woods the ball more. At this point in the season, why would he? So moving forward, Robert Woods has to be outside of my top 24 wide receivers. He's probably a high to mid-tier wide receiver 3. He's still going to have success in certain games, and honestly, that's when I would think about moving him. He's probably still going to be able to bring back more value than he should, and I am dropping him lower than a guy like Allen Robinson because usage is not an issue for A-Rob. He is still the clear wide receiver 1 on that Bears offense. If they're able to kind of figure things out, then he could really break out. The issue here with Woods is that this offense has figured it out, and they figured out that Robert Woods is not going to be a huge factor. So that's why he's kind of been dropped a little bit more harshly than A-Rob. But here we have my 5th and final player who is drastically moving down my rankings, and that is Kyle Pitts. He's actually someone that I was much lower on than consensus. He was my tight end 6, which, I mean, he was in that tier with Hockenson and Mark Andrews, but I viewed him more as like an early 6th round pick, kind of behind those two players. But he was being drafted as a mid 4th round pick on Underdog Fantasy Football. I thought that was crazy, and so far my original assumption has kind of held true. He is the tight end 15 through 3 games, averaging 8.3 PPR points per game, and he's had, some decent opportunities. It really just hasn't translated to results. He has an 84.9% route participation. That's number 4 amongst other tight ends. He's been targeted 17 times. That's 7th at the tight end position, a 15.2% target share. That's 9th among other tight ends. I do think he's going to continue to improve throughout the season. I think he's definitely going to be a locked-in top 12, probably top 10 tight end. Rookies can start slow no matter what position they play, but I think at this point in the season, it is pretty clear that he was overdrafted. And moving forward, I view him somewhere in that tight end 7 to tight end 10 range. I think there's kind of a clear distance between Kelsey, Waller, Kittle, Hockenson, Gronk, and Andrews. You have those 6 guys kind of locked in there, and then there's a pretty decent amount of space. Then you have guys like Pitts, Higbee, Thomas Fant, really in whatever order you're looking at. And so that's kind of how I'm evaluating him moving forward. But those are the 5 players that are shooting down my rankings through the first 3 weeks of the season. If you guys enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you want to see the 5 players shooting up my rankings, go check out yesterday's video. I talked about some of those guys there. But thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.